textbook for midwives, page 33, chapter 3. These will be notes from chapters 3 and 4. In recent years, the difference between hospital-based care and community midwifery care has become less distinct as flexible patterns of midwifery care are developed. These patterns of care are focused on the needs of the woman and so are often community-based. Such midwifery care that reflects the needs of the pregnant woman and takes account of her and her family's personal and social circumstances is better able to positively influence the health and well-being of her and her baby. It just seems like it should say of she and her baby, her and her baby. This chapter aims to describe the role of the midwife as well as the she and her family's personal and social circumstances instead of her and her family's. This chapter aims to describe the role of the midwife and the scope of her practice in the community during the antenatal, intrapartum, and postnatal periods. Review the skills a midwife requires for home birth, including her responsibility to ensure that women have the necessary information to choose this if they wish. Consider the midwife's relationship with other healthcare professionals involved in the care of the pregnant woman, especially the GP and the obstetrician. Introduction. Community midwifery is one of the functions of community health care. It aims to promote the health and well-being of mothers and babies and to support sound parenting and stable families. It encompasses pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, birth, and puerperium. Community midwifery has its roots close to the home and in essence is concerned with meeting the health needs of women and their families. Question mark, underline families. It is locally based outside the institution of the hospital, although community midwives sometimes work in hospital, for example, supporting women in labor. Supporting the normal processes of pregnancy while detecting the abnormal. These principles act as the goals for all midwifery care, a period of great change. Systems, team of healthcare professionals, primary healthcare team, namely the community midwife and GP or general practitioner, those who practice in the community is less clear, more flexibility, community schemes, know the midwife who cares for her. With such community schemes, there is greater chance that the woman and her family will know the midwife who cares for her. Role of the community midwife, care in pregnancy. It is still the norm for a woman to visit her GP to confirm her pregnancy and to discuss options for care, although it is becoming increasingly common for a midwife, often working from a health center or a GP practice, to fulfill this function. Although GPs and obstetricians are often unenthusiastic about domiciliary bookings, these have been shown to improve liaison between the hospital and the GP and to improve women's satisfaction in their care. The midwife should always make an appointment before visiting the woman and ensure the pregnancy remains confidential. Taking a full medical and social history and discussing options for care in the home environment is a highly effective use of time. It is especially important to ensure that the woman understands the implications of the choices she makes about her pregnancy care. Conducting the interview on the woman's territory helps to facilitate choice and control, including enabling the woman to make informed decisions about any screening tests she is offered. Language difficulties may require that an interpreter is involved. In the light of the woman's history, a plan can then be made for care during pregnancy and birth. Although women tend to be satisfied with whatever form of care they receive, Tucker, 1996, there has been criticism of the traditional pattern of antenatal examinations Although there is support for a reduction in visits, change to long-established practices has been slow. Women need to be involved in planning appropriate antenatal care for themselves, which encompasses their employment, child care, and domestic circumstances, as well as their health needs. This concept of partnership is reinforced by women holding their own notes and having full access to their health records. Whatever the setting, the midwife is responsible for undertaking a thorough examination of the woman so that she can identify any problems and respond to the woman's needs appropriately. She must ensure that all the necessary blood tests and screening tests are carried out and that the results are reported to the woman and recorded in the notes. Midwife must know how to refer the woman to the appropriate person. Evaluated community-led care for women with complicated pregnancies and showed that it could be successful. Reinforce the importance of close control of the blood sugar. The midwife can offer practical help tailored to the woman's own needs. Other critics, for example, Redmond 1996, have also argued that reducing the number of antenatal examinations may lead to cases of preeclampsia being missed and thus a rise in mortality and morbidity rates. Social support in pregnancy is of vital importance and has been shown to improve satisfaction with medical care and women's feelings of being in control. It has also been shown to result in higher breastfeeding rates, greater involvement of the father, and fewer worrying health problems of the baby. Long-term follow-up studies have shown that 6 years later, women reported better relationships with their children, had higher self-esteem, and fewer were smoking. Although the midwife is the primary carer early in the postnatal period, she is supported by the GP and the health visitor. And as time elapses, roles and responsibilities become blurred. Intrapartum care, as well as providing care for planned events, the community midwife is responsible for midwifery support for emergencies that occur outside the hospital or before the woman reaches the hospital. She may be required to attend emergencies with the ambulance crew, or she may be required to attend by herself. Fulfilling this role requires that the midwife is experienced and skilled and has the support and backup of the full range of maternity and emergency services. Many community midwives also deliver babies in hospital, providing continuity of care for the women to whom they have given antenatal care and will care for postnatally. The midwife's skills of communication are as imperative when she is working in a hospital setting. Liaising with obstetricians and hospital midwives is when she is in the woman's home and finds she requires assistance there. So for social support in pregnancy, my note is local assembly. It has been shown to result in higher breastfeeding rates, greater involvement of the father, and fewer worrying health problems of the baby. My note is epigenetics, ? So the social support is huge, and good social support and a good circle and network seem to, or would make me question if they influence, and it apparently research would now support that indeed a good social support in pregnancy is of vital importance and has been shown to improve epigenetics, not just the satisfaction with medical care or the women's feelings of being in control. It has also been shown to result in higher breastfeeding rates, greater involvement of the father, and fewer worrying health problems of the baby. Long-term follow-up studies have shown that 6 years later, women reported better relationships with their children, had higher self-esteem, and fewer were smoking. Oh Lord Jesus, please resurrect local assemblies with their own midwifery service. Although the midwife is the primary carer early in the postnatal period, she is supported by the GP and the health visitor, and as time elapses, roles and responsibilities become blurred. Intrapartum care, as well as providing care for planned events, the community midwife is responsible. Assistance there, communication. As so few babies are born at home, students have few opportunities to learn the practical skills required, and midwives have little opportunity to develop their experience and confidence, the students' experience and confidence, that is. Now there's an increasing number of complaints about care at home births within these Association for Improvements in Maternity Services only received complaints about poor quality of care in hospital, but now there is an increasing number of complaints about care at home births. These complaints relate to not carrying essential equipment, sonic aid, infant resuscitation equipment, nitrous oxide and oxygen, nervous and inexperienced midwives who are probably unused to home births, and to dangerous interventionist practice. It is clear that the community midwife needs to be competent and skillful in all areas of her clinical work. Maintaining the full range of clinical skills poses a unique problem for the midwife working in the community who may undertake very few deliveries either at home or in hospital. Similarly, the midwife who is confident and experienced with home births may not have the same competence and clinical dexterity when she is working in a hospital. Exclam, unique individual, expert at one thing. Choose. It would seem that on the one hand, it would be wonderful for a midwife to be exposed, at least briefly, to every possible environment that midwives work in, from hospital to birthing center to very low resource to very centrally low urban homes in urban environments where they're very close to emergency ambulance services and hospitals. And yet, on the other hand, it would seem that the midwife should maybe just very briefly experience all those places and then really hone in her skills in the resource setting that she is going to be working in for the majority and duration of her time in service. My thinking is that I want to experience high volume birth, particularly birth, and one day be an expert in low resource birth settings for the Christian women who may not have access to any other services. When community midwives are providing care for all women rather than just for low risk women, learning and maintaining this array of skills is difficult. This difficulty is felt doubly by midwives who work part-time and whose clinical contact time is further reduced. Backing up to repeat, maintaining the full range of clinical skills poses a unique problem for the midwife working in the community who may undertake very few deliveries either at home or in hospital. Similarly, the midwife who is competent and experienced with home births may not have the same confidence and clinical dexterity when she is working in a hospital. On the delivery suite, the midwife is expected to use a range of fetal monitoring equipment, assist with fetal blood sampling, care for women with epidural and spinal analgesia, and even assist with cesarean sections. When community midwives are providing care for all women rather than just for low-risk women, learning and maintaining this array of skills is difficult. This difficulty is felt doubly by midwives who work part-time and whose clinical contact time is further reduced. A study investigating community midwives' experience of home birth found that it was important for them to be able to perform intravenous cannulation, neonatal resuscitation, and perineal suturing. Without these skills, the midwives felt anxious and unhappy about booking women to give birth at home. Floyd, 1995. Individual performance reviews and assessments of midwives' needs should highlight areas where skills need developing or refreshing. Clinical support for midwives inexperienced with home birth or midwives who are isolated or working alone is essential to develop and maintain safe practice and expertise. Clinical support for midwives inexperienced with home birth or midwives who are isolated or working alone is essential to develop and maintain safe practice and expertise. This can take the form of a formalized midwife to midwife support system where an experienced midwife acts as a mentor or may be achieved through the education system. The supervisor is crucial in the development of appropriate educational programs for community midwives, which should form part of the midwife's professional portfolio. McDonald, 1996, a clinical skills training scheme, the Maternal and Neonatal Emergencies Training Project, MANET, designed for midwives, GPs, and junior obstetric staff, is currently under evaluation. Kennedy, 1995. Although there is always concern that study leave further depletes the workforce and reduces continuity of care, the importance of well-planned, needs-related, appropriate continuing education for community midwives cannot be overemphasized. My notes, full-time, high-volume, question mark. Postnatal care. The postnatal period means a period of not less than 10 and not more than 28 days after the end of labor, during which the continued attendance of a midwife is requisite. UKC, 1993. The mother often wants to talk about her labor and delivery, and the community midwife is the ideal person to do the listening. Some women need help to debrief about birth, and this can help in the adjustment to becoming a mother. Yes, debrief, exclaim, number one need. My notes. Number one frustration for many women, I would say, after birth, the ability to find a confidant to patiently listen and caringly listen while the mother shares and unburdens her heart with any and everything that was upsetting, as well as the positive things about the birth. The midwife should be able to give practical solutions to specific problems, such as a painful perineal laceration, but she needs to understand that problems may persist well beyond the scope of her postnatal visiting. The midwife should support and promote breastfeeding where this is appropriate, where would it not be, and must observe and monitor changes in the breast where they affect the health of the mother and baby. Visiting the mother in order to observe a breastfeed is essential if the mother is experiencing problems, especially, I would say. Planning this requires tact and flexibility if it is to benefit the mother. The baby should always be observed to identify satisfactory behavior, including feeding behavior, breathing and oxygenation, separation of the cord, and absence of signs of infection. Monitoring the baby's weight and ensuring that the appropriate screening tests are performed should always be undertaken with the parent's agreement. The establishment of breastfeeding takes far longer than the period that the community midwife is able to visit for, and yet it is an integral part of her responsibility. Despite the proven benefits of breastfeeding to the baby and mother, it is not widespread. 68% of women in England and Wales started to breastfeed in 1995, but only 44% were still feeding at 6 weeks. Foster et al., 1997. The main reasons given by women for discontinuation are insufficient milk, sore breasts and nipples, and the baby rejecting the breast. The community midwife has a clear responsibility to support breastfeeding, but lack of experience or other More urgent demands on her time may leave her feeling unable to continue visiting. Health visitors rarely have sufficient experience or resources to fulfill this essential role. There is therefore little help and support for breastfeeding in the community apart from voluntary groups such as the National Childbirth Trust. Supporting women through these feeding problems requires real commitment and determination, but if the midwife is able to do this, it can be a highly effective and worthwhile use of her time in promoting long-term health. My notes are Amos 3:3. Not sure what that goes with right for the moment. Selective visiting. It is important that the timing as well as the purpose of each postnatal visit is agreed, Amos 3:3, with the mother. Selective visiting. It is important that the timing as well as the purpose of each postnatal visit is agreed with the mother. If the midwife does not visit each day before day 10, she remains responsible for the care and supervision of the woman and her baby. Each midwife remains personally responsible and accountable for the exercise of professional judgment and in determining appropriate practice in relation to the mother and her baby. This naturally includes judgments about the number of visits and any additional visits required in the postnatal period. Notes: midwives need prayer. She must make it clear how the mother should contact her in the event of any concern arising before the next planned visit. It is possible that overwork could influence some midwives to reduce the frequency and duration of their visits even further. A workload study of community midwives found that an average of only 17 minutes was spent with each client, although this varied with the dependency classification of the woman. Griffin and Hendy, 1995. Clearly, some women do have ongoing problems, and a study by Garcia and Marchant, 1996, found that between 10 and 20% of women were still being visited on day 14. Selective visiting can free midwives to concentrate their efforts where they are most needed and has the potential to improve continuity of care and resolve problems with conflicting advice. Ball, 1987. However, it is important to remember that home visiting may bring midwives into contact with some women who find it hard to express their needs and may find it difficult to ask for help. Triple question mark. The community midwife needs clear and effective methods of communication to other health and welfare professionals, including the social worker and the health visitor, although the health visitor usually takes over responsibility after 10 days. If the midwife is continuing to visit because of ongoing problems, effective liaison must take place to ensure that the woman is appropriately supported and does not receive conflicting advice. There is an argument for extending the statutory scope of the midwife's responsibility to at least 6 weeks. To emphasize the importance of the wider scope of postnatal care, the benefits of social and psychological support have been upheld by research. The midwife may have scope for facilitating women's groups, postnatal support groups, breastfeeding support schemes, family planning services, child care programs, education schemes in local schools, and drop-in centers for teenagers. Some midwives become very involved with such initiatives, acting as much as a community health worker as a midwife. And I just imagined combining all those things into one women's group where everyone wears a name tag and writes down upon arrival their greatest concern for that meeting, and someone reads all of those concerns, or the women just go around in a circle at the beginning of the meeting stating what they came to the meeting hoping to receive help with, and then those women can the meeting can break, and those women who might be able to help the other woman can search her out, and then come together again at the end of the meeting, and all of the women say what they still have need of or what was not answered for them, and maybe break again and try again, or have different specialists or experts or just mothers with experience um, address the group at the end of the meeting. Dot dot dot. Maternity services are able to be more responsive to the specific needs of the population they serve. What is essential is that the midwife endeavors to ensure that the woman has the support networks in place to give her the necessary health surveillance and help that she may continue to require. I underline surveillance, health surveillance, note creepy. We're from the government and we're here to help. School monitors in Canada. It doesn't seem like you hear much about this, but my understanding is that all homeschoolers in Canada have school surveillance that come to their house. Home birth. Home birth is the birth of a baby in the family home. This usually occurs because the parents believe that birth is a natural process and they want it to take place within the environment of the family home. This is known as planned home birth. If complications arise during pregnancy or labor, believe. Key word being believe. Beliefs matter. This is known as planned home birth. If complications arise during pregnancy or labor, it may be necessary to transfer the woman to hospital care. And what happens if that's not an option for the woman? This is the scenario, I think, as time goes on, that Christian midwives will be faced with. Home births are infrequent events and in 1994 represented only 1.8% of all births, although there is some evidence that the rate is increasing. 30 years ago, 1/3 of all babies were born at home, but the rate fell to an all-time low in 1987, 0.9% of all births. This rate varies and is higher in individual areas. For example, in Brighton, many pressures contributed to this decline, and some of these are discussed later in the chapter. Because so few births take place at home, meaningful and valid investigation is virtually impossible. Nevertheless, there is tremendous need for data to evaluate birth at home. The Northern Region Perinatal Mortality Survey Coordinating Group stated that the question about planned home birth was not concerned with whether home birth was safe, but whether it was less safe than hospital birth. During the same period, a further 182 unplanned home births occurred, and at these there were 9 stillbirths and 3 neonatal deaths. 34 of these women had received no antenatal care whatsoever. These findings support previous studies that demonstrate the hazards to babies born unexpectedly at home. The National Birthday Trust Survey investigated the outcomes for all women who planned to deliver their babies at home during 1994. This study confirmed that the highest rate of complications occurred amongst women who had unplanned home births, while the overall perinatal outcome for women who planned to and did deliver at home was excellent. Chamberlain et al., 1997. Some women will not achieve their desire for a home birth, and this study also showed that the transfer rate to hospital delivery was 40% amongst prima gravide, although only 10% amongst multigravide. The main reason for transfer was prolonged labor. Even women who were transferred were glad to have the opportunity to undertake some of the labor at home. Natural, non-clinical environment and the peacefulness and privacy. Davies, 1996. As far back as 1978, Kitzinger investigated why women chose to deliver at home and reported that the quality of the experience, a desire to be with their families, and the avoidance of unnecessary interventions were important. O'Brien conducted a study published in 1978 when there was strong political pressure for deliveries to take place only in hospital. He demonstrated that the environment in which the baby is born does affect satisfaction and showed that this was greater in deliveries taking place at home. Carrying out home births enables the midwife to practice her role to the full. and helps her to develop her skills and confidence. Davies et al. 1996, Floyd 1995. Midwives often have very little home birth experience upon which to develop their skills, either as students or in the course of their careers. Midwives often have very little home birth experience upon which to develop their skills either as students or in the course of their careers. A study of community midwives' experience of home birth showed that half the midwives had attended fewer than 6 home births and 9% had never attended any. Floyd, 1995. These findings are echoed by the Northern Region Survey. In both studies, midwives were positive about home birth and believed it to be important for women to have the option. Midwives in both studies reported that they had a range of practical concerns and would benefit from better on-call support from colleagues, managers, supervisors, and the obstetric team in the event of complications arising. Although communication is improving through the use of mobile phones, midwives also reported that they needed specific clinical skills in suturing, setting up intravenous infusions, and in resuscitation of mother and baby. These skills need to be specifically taught and updated in the home rather than in the hospital. Some midwives were anxious about the equipment they carried, in particular adequate and easily portable nitrous oxide and oxygen. Emergency support in the community is now rarely provided by the emergency obstetric unit or flying squad. A well-equipped paramedic service which carries individuals skilled in resuscitation, which is able to respond immediately and can transfer women and babies rapidly to a specialist unit, is now considered to be more appropriate than a team which attempts to undertake procedures in the home. RCOG 1990 ? Care of the woman at home, preparing for a home birth. My note, just as delivering in the emergency setting, just in case, must be balanced with the risk and harm that can happen in that setting to would-be healthy mothers and babies. The benefits of delivering in the familiar surroundings of the home must be carefully balanced against the distance from emergency assistance should complications arise. However, mothers distance themselves intentionally from emergency assistance based on the concern of rash use of such or wrong use altogether. Page 40, box 31, preparation of the woman considering a home birth. 1. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of home birth. Try to provide as much factual information as possible, including any local statistics. My note, disadvantages of hospital birth, along with advantages, perhaps. But that would be for higher risk women, I think. I don't see advantages for low risk women of hospital birth. Explain the role of the midwife during a home birth. Number 2, explain the role of the midwife during a home birth, including the conduct of labor. Describe what the midwife will do in specific circumstances, e.g., postpartum hemorrhage, asphyxiated baby, shoulder dystocia, transfer to hospital. 3, explain how to contact the midwife when in labor. 4, discuss what the role of the GP is likely to be depending on whether he wishes to be present at the birth. 5, discuss how often and when the woman will be visited postnatally. 6, talk about how to contact the local home birth support group if one exists. Oh Lord, let there be a local home birth support group. In Jesus' name I pray. Lord, let it be Henry County Home Birth Support Group, Lord, according to your will. The mother, discuss pain relief. Okay, no. What happens when a country bans guns? Okay, a midwife's car will always be a target for theft, and so drugs and other equipment should not be left unattended. Sadly, it is also possible that a midwife could prove a target for crime, and so she should always act to protect her own personal safety. This consideration may mean that during some hours of the night and in some areas, the midwife should not be out alone. But that's the nature of the work. My note, exclam question. Solution, midwives should be trained in basic self-defense, including the use of a gun. Care during labor at home. Unlike hospital where the woman is in unfamiliar surroundings, in her own home she is able to behave spontaneously and normally. A close relationship can develop during the labor, but the midwife remains a guest in the home and must respect the family's views and wishes. The midwife should organize the equipment as efficiently but as unobtrusively as possible while taking great care of furniture and floor coverings. She must not reproduce a delivery room atmosphere, yet must have her equipment rapidly to hand when required. Great skill is needed to rigorously monitor, the well-being and condition of the baby and mother effectively, and to keep concurrent records, yet without disturbing the relaxed atmosphere of the home in the process of labor. None of that seems to go together. Observation of the condition of the mother and baby must be made throughout with sufficient frequency to ensure that problems are identified in good time. Accurate and thorough records must be maintained at all times. The classic skills of the community midwife are to monitor, watch, wait, and support. Robinson, 1997. And therefore the midwife's role is to support the normal processes of labor while monitoring the well-being of the mother and baby throughout. Familiarity with the woman's wishes will determine how the labor and delivery are conducted, where the baby is born, and how the third stage of labor is managed. The midwife must be aware of how important it is not to disturb the normal physiological processes by any action or behavior which could expose the woman to harm. Throughout the labor, the midwife must be constantly aware that the consequences of any abnormality are more serious at home. She must satisfy herself that she knows how to recognize complications and that she can cope with emergencies when they occur. See box 3-4. My notes, page 4, box 1-1. Going back to page 4, box 1-1. A midwife, the international definition of the midwife being a midwife is a person who, having been regularly admitted to a midwifery educational program duly recognized in the country in which it is located, has successfully completed the prescribed course of studies in midwifery and has acquired the requisite qualifications to be registered and or legally licensed to practice midwifery. Does not negate the need of the midwife to satisfy herself that she knows how to recognize complications and that she can cope with emergencies when they occur. Picking back up page 41. Where two midwives are in attendance, although each remains fully accountable for her actions, there must be agreement over who assumes primary responsibility for decision making. It has also been reported that where two midwives are in attendance, they can spend more time talking to each other than observing the woman. Each situation needs to be assessed sensitively, but with due regard for the needs of the woman. The midwife must ensure that the GP knows that the woman is in labor if he is providing intrapartum care. The midwife should visit the woman at home, ideally for all prenatal and postpartum visits, not necessarily with an assistant each time. The midwife must ensure that the GP knows the woman is in labor if he is providing intrapartum care. The midwife must know how to contact the ambulance service and must have an idea how long assistance is likely to take in coming. She must have a clear system of communication with the obstetric. The decisions that a midwife makes during a home birth require the greatest clinical judgments and may be the hardest that a midwife makes in her working life. This sense of responsibility and accountability can make the experience of birth at home as profound for midwives as it is for women. Box 3-4, labor complications arising during a home birth. Prolonged first or second stage without fetal distress. This is not an acute emergency. The midwife should discuss the likely causes and outcomes with the woman and a member of the obstetric team. Meconium stained liquor. In the absence of other complications, the midwife must be able to identify how much meconium is present in the liquor and be alert to the potential risk of fetal distress. The causes should be discussed with the woman and a member of the obstetric team. Fetal heart rate abnormality. The action required depends on the severity. Antepartum hemorrhage. This is an acute emergency for which it is appropriate to call an ambulance for immediate transfer to hospital. Shoulder dystocia. This can be an unexpected and acute emergency, so the midwife must know how to deal with this situation herself. See Chapter 29. Postpartum hemorrhage. The midwife must know how to identify the cause of the hemorrhage and to control it. She should know how to insert an intravenous infusion into suture perineal lacerations. Retained placenta. The midwife needs to know how to manually remove the placenta in the absence of medical assistance. Birth asphyxia. The midwife must ensure that she has up-to-date experience of resuscitation. She must have the correct equipment, which is checked each time she attends a home birth. My notes: breech, multiples, etc., etc. Anything that would be considered a variation from normal, and the midwife must be an expert in normal. The midwife is the key work. In the second, the midwife is the key worker, needing only a distant relationship with the. For the first, a culturally attuned translator may be the key worker, displacing doctor and midwife, and in the second, the midwife is the key worker, needing only a distant relationship with the GP. Racism. A refugee population and experience of racism and violence is very different from that associated with independent midwifery sought by an educated and affluent population. Can't help but think of a clinic being in a poorer, socioeconomically depressed neighborhood, like the antithesis of Margaret Sanger's work. Page 43, complementary. GP is to provide midwifery support, and his skills should therefore be complementary to those of the midwife. Midwives remain personally accountable for their actions and decisions even when there is a named GP or consultant in charge. Family doctors are anxious to maintain contact with their patients during pregnancy, precisely because it is such an important event for the family. Make more connections with family doctors or GPs. Naturally, a woman continues to require medical care while she is pregnant, and so it is important that the GP maintains this continuity. The woman also requires a medical examination to ensure that her cardiovascular system is fit for inhalation analgesia. The role of the midwife and the GP should therefore complement each other rather than conflict. A more serious issue concerns the role of practice nurses employed directly by GPs. Tyler, 1996, voices the concern that these practice nurses are undertaking a range of midwifery duties. Even where these nurses hold a midwifery qualification, fragmented care and reduced continuity result. It is very difficult to monitor the practice of such nurses and to ensure high quality care through the supervision system. Developments in the community midwifery service 1900 to 1997, the history of community midwives. This century has reflected the conditions and needs of women and their families. In the early part of the century, the high maternal and infant mortality rate was a cause of national concern, and this, fueled by the women's movement, led to increasing pressure on the state to make better provision for childbearing women. Poor general health, unemployment, low wages, and poor housing made living conditions difficult for many families. Educating mothers in the care of their babies. Educating mothers in the care of their babies. Better nutrition as well as supervision of pregnancy and labor were the foundation of maternity care. The number of untrained handy women declined, and most pregnant women received maternity care from qualified doctors and midwives. The domiciliary midwifery service was a popular, efficient, and above all a safe service with low rates of mortality and morbidity. Throughout the century, maternal mortality and stillbirth rates steadily declined, although this was probably due to improvements in diet and general health, together with better social and health care, rather than specific improvements in maternity care. From the start of the National Health Service in 1948, district midwives provided a community-based service which functioned with the public health system. The midwife worked from her own home and was accountable only to her supervisor of midwives and to her clients. Domiciliary midwives cared for women booked for home birth, providing all their antenatal, intrapartum, and postnatal care. By contrast, women booked for hospital delivery were cared for solely by hospital staff, received all their antenatal care at the hospital antenatal clinic, and remained in hospital for the full lying-in period after delivery. Domiciliary midwives' caseloads were heavy, with long working and on-call hours. Allison, 1995. During the 1950s, the serious shortage of hospital beds meant that a woman was unlikely to be able to deliver in hospital unless she had serious problems. Many homes were in very poor condition, and so women often delivered their babies at home in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions because there was no alternative. In effect, district midwives booked women who chose a home birth and all those who could not be fitted into the system elsewhere. Allison, 1995, page 53. The Association for Improvements in the Maternity Services, AIMS, was set up to campaign for more hospital beds. Ironically, one of its main functions now is to campaign for women's rights to choose home birth. During this time, it was believed that hospitalization and intervention in childbirth would improve maternal and neonatal outcomes. During the 1950s and 1960s, domiciliary practice declined along with the home birth rate, and the trend was to provide hospital care in small cottage-style hospitals or small GP units. In the event of an unexpected home birth, the GP and midwife would attend together and provide whatever expertise they possessed. A review of the maternity services by the Peel Committee, DHSS 1970, recommended an integrated midwifery service which combined domiciliary and hospital maternity care. This review also recommended that all births should take place in hospital despite the lack of evidence to support this. It was not until 1975 that perinatal mortality figures were collected by the place of delivery, and these showed that birth at home was associated with higher mortality for babies. These data were not examined closely until the 1980s, when more detailed scrutiny showed that a high proportion of these home births were to single young women under 20, and that the higher risks were therefore a result of social factors rather than simply due to the fact of place of birth, or that the birth took place at home. Campbell et al., 1982 to 1995 TEW. The Cardiff Births Survey investigated the differences in perinatal mortality between planned and unplanned home births. Murphy et al., 1984, 0.6% of the women, and identified the risk to women who planned to deliver in hospital but did not arrive in time. 5.4% of the babies died, and the even more serious risk to women who did not arrange any maternity care whatsoever. 20% of these babies died. In contrast, only 0.6% of the women who planned to and actually did deliver at home lost their babies. These findings were confirmed by another study of all babies born at home in 1979, Campbell et al., 1984. The findings showed considerable differences between women who planned to and did deliver at home. Perinatal mortality rate of 4.1/1,000. Women who booked to deliver in hospital but delivered at home. Perinatal mortality rate of 67.5 to 1,000. And women who were completely unbooked. Perinatal mortality rate of 196.6 to 1,000. It remains impossible to assess accurately the relative safety because such studies do not take account of the women who planned to deliver at home but were transferred to hospital. Any emergency arising during labor is associated with significant risk to the mother and baby. In the post-war years, there was often considerable friction between hospital and community-based midwives. Nothing new under the sun. Hospital midwives worked under the obstetrician, who was the dominant partner. By the late 1970s, most deliveries occurred in large, centralized units. Units with fewer than 500 deliveries per year were considered unable to provide the necessary expertise and resources, and so were steadily closed. One of the results of these changes was the development of shared care, where antenatal care was shared between the obstetrician and the GP and midwife. The hospital came to be considered as where the important care was carried out, while there was little value seen in the community contribution. The organization of midwifery care, supervisors. Note, this is antithetical to the practice of religious or spiritual midwifery. What if a pagan is the supervisor and the midwife is a Christian? Clash. Midwives practicing in the community must ensure that they are fully conversant with these rules as well as with local policies. Going back to the former note, supervisors should be available for midwives to discuss their practice and be a source of sound professional advice, as well as monitoring standards and investigating critical incidents. The Midwives Rules, UKCC 1993, are made in accordance with the Midwifery Committee recommendations under the Nurses, Midwives, and Health Visitors Act 1979, and define the scope of practice of all midwives, while the Midwives Code of Practice, UKC 1994, elaborates the rules and acts as a guide. Act 19 both require that midwives keep appropriate records and ensure that confidentiality is maintained throughout. In certain cases, individuals are entitled to gain access to information held about them. Why would that not be in all cases? Individuals are entitled to gain access to the information held about them. The Community Midwifery Service is responsible for ensuring that midwives are available who can give the necessary high-quality antenatal, intrapartum, and postnatal care to meet the needs of the local population. The way that the service is organized will vary between areas to reflect particular local needs. For example, an inner-city area with a large ethnic minority population and a high density of temporary accommodation may require midwives with language skills or who work with a translator. Midwives may need to run a drop-in center or a clinic within a hospital to ensure that antenatal care is available for women who often have multiple health and social problems. Planned home birth may be more appropriate than the hazards of a lengthy journey to hospital for some multi-gravid women. Models of community midwifery care. Disadvantage of shared antenatal care is that care is fragmented. Oh yeah, group prenatal care. Ding ding ding. The disadvantage of shared antenatal care is that care mother to mother prenatal care. The disadvantage. I'm almost done. Almost. The disadvantage of shared antenatal care is that care is fragmented and women see many different health professionals. It can also lead to interprofessional difficulties if there is no clear pattern of responsibility. Furthermore, midwives working in the community who do not undertake deliveries lose their clinical skills. Community midwives who frequently deliver babies in hospital maintain their skills in close working relationships with the hospital staff. Providing cover for midwives to undertake the range of duties in the community as well as being on call for deliveries in hospital can be difficult. Instrumental delivery, team midwifery, neighborhood center and facilitating local support group. The midwives were also involved in the running of a neighborhood center and facilitating local support groups. The project was shown to reduce smoking and improve the diet of the women and reduce the number of low birth weight babies. It was also very popular with the women. Like other schemes of this type, midwives also report greater job satisfaction. Davies and Evans, 1991. Team midwifery can be very popular with women and midwives, but is difficult to implement with midwives who work part-time amongst larger groups of midwives or in hospitals. Caseload midwifery, respecting their rights, values, and beliefs. Learning to work in this way can be difficult as there is no clear distinction between working time and off-duty time. Midwives with children and other domestic commitments may be unable to accommodate the demands of caseload practice. However, many midwives report more job satisfaction as a result of their increased accountability and responsibility. So, the difference between team midwifery and caseload midwifery, or a combination of the two, going on now, continuing on in regards to caseload. Until recently, GPs have been unable to purchase maternity provision, but in 1996, 6 practices began to pilot the purchase of maternity care. These pilot projects were specifically charged with the task of providing woman-centered care. Tyler, 1996. These 6 schemes are exploring how GPs can purchase the services of midwifery group practices from trust. Midwifery group practices are a natural extension of team midwifery, whereby midwives work together providing total care to a defined group of women, usually based within a geographical location. The midwife acts as the lead professional, providing the majority of the woman's care. Questions. Think about what information a woman requires in order to make an informed choice about whether or not to have a home birth. How can she obtain this information? Home birth support groups, La Leche League style. Identify what facilities exist, but even more egalitarian than La Leche League. Identify what facilities exist for maternity emergencies in your area and how they operate. What policies or procedures govern their provision? Which of the midwives' rules apply when a woman who wants a home birth refuses to be transferred during labor? What are the midwife's responsibilities? Find out what community maternity statistics are kept in your area. What records are kept of planned home births, unplanned home births, transfers to hospital of babies planned to be born at home, and unbooked deliveries. Who keeps these figures and how are they recorded? Write a community profile for childbearing women in your area. Do they have any particular needs, and how could the community midwifery service adapt to meet these needs? Did not make it to notes in chapter 4. In conclusion of chapter 3, Myles, textbook for midwives.